you know, looking at how it's affecting the individual's life and whether it's going to keep them from remaining in their home. So physical abuse is pretty easy to spot. It's an act, someone punching or slapping or hitting, those types of things. If it's someone over 60, they're residing in their community, that's going to be an elder abuse report. That's pretty quick. Emotional abuse is it's a little bit harder to identify. But I look at that as someone that's constantly yelling at an elderly person, or making comments that really could be hurtful. A lot of times it's threats against their independence. So I'm going to put you in a nursing home, or I'm going to call Social Security on you, or things like that. Those kinds of things can be really emotionally damaging to individuals. So I mean, you think about it, with emotional abuse, a lot of it's verbal. And it's those kinds of threats to independence. It's those kinds of things that I really look at for emotional abuse. Sexual abuse is something that is a very serious issue in the community, and it's a lot of people nationally and at the statewide level, they have a hard time discussing this topic because they don't think of older individuals in that way. They look at it through an ageist lens that elders are sexual beings just like anyone else, and sexual abuse does happen. That could be, in the form of rape. It could be in the form of, touching someone inappropriately. There's all different forms. That one, I think it's easy to identify, but it's uncomfortable to talk about. So that one, I know Lou's going to talk a little bit more about it because he's got a little bit more expertise. But it's just something that everyone has to talk about and really, be open about discussing because it can, again, it's uncomfortable for some people to discuss. Financial exploitation is one of those ones that's growing very rapidly. A lot of it has to do with the advent of the internet and different types of scams out there. So I look at this as, anytime that someone is trying to take property or money away from an elder, and this can come in a variety of ways. A lot of it is different types of phone scams. I'm sure many of you guys have heard of the grandparent scam, where someone will call up claiming to be a grandchild and saying you need to wire so much money or they're going to be arrested or something like that. There's the IRS scam, where someone posing as a tax collector will be calling. Promise you, the IRS or government agencies don't call up and demand that you wire money in order not to be arrested. That won't happen. There's one that I've actually encountered. There's a lot of scams that individuals are using local phone numbers that look very similar to your own number. So maybe the same number as your cell phone number or just one digit off. And the key there is that they're playing on those with Alzheimer's or dementia that may recognize the number and then be more apt to pick it up. And then once they get on the phone, they'll try a variety of techniques to try and take your money and get you to hand over your hard-earned resources. And that one, it's personal to me because I see it on my own phone. Those kind of calls coming in. So that's financial exploitation can come in a lot of forms. A lot of it too is family members that someone that's close to the elder, an adult child, a grandchild that may be stealing from the elder, taking prescription medications for substance abuse issues. Those kinds of things happen on a regular basis, and those kinds of things can be prevented as well, through protective services or through talking to members of your community, maybe getting a prescription lockbox or changing the way you're doing banking. Those kinds of things can be addressed. But again, financial exploitation can be strangers. It can be members of the family. Neglect, I look at that one as someone is dependent on a caretaker. Maybe they don't, their caretaker won't help them with personal care or won't take on some of their responsibilities in the home. Those kinds of things, you want to look for harm that's resulting of it. If maybe the person needs assistance, moving around their home and the caretaker's refusing to do that and the elder's falling, that's an example of caretaker neglect. And self-neglect kind of goes in a similar a box that it's it's the inability to take care of yourself. Maybe you need that extra assistance to move around your home, but you haven't asked for it or you haven't reached out, and there's a fall that's associated with it. That's kind of the self-neglect the typical cases we'll see. At the far end of the spectrum on self-neglect, you'll see hoarding cases. You'll see situations where someone is maybe not heating their home correctly, people using their stove or their oven to try and heat their homes. Those types of things can trigger a self-neglect case. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. And maybe the other members of the panel could add a few insights on that.
Especially with the sexual abuse, when we're talking about ageism, because that's a big thing. Ageism is a big part of sexual abuse, especially for the elderly. And I'm talking in regards to reporting. Now, reporting is down, especially in terms of sexual abuse with the elderly, not just here in Cape Cod or in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but all over the country. And the reason for that is a lot of people just can't fathom the idea that A, people over the age of 60 are sexual beings, and B, that somebody, a perpetrator, would actually do that to somebody of that age. So that's one of the things that I want to throw out there, that ageism, this big myth of all these things, is one of the problems to reporting sexual abuse. Just because somebody's over that age, this stuff still does happen. We've seen it even here locally where people have, even professionals, have missed the signs because they just couldn't break through those myths. So that is one of the things that I just wanted to get out there as well regarding sexual abuse. Emotional abuse is one of the more difficult ones for us to be able to substantiate and define. And that's because there has to be an impact. So you could have an elderly couple that, they've been married for many, many years. And maybe they argue and fight. But if there's no impact, if they say, oh, that's Joe, he's just a big blowhard, that's what he does. Or one of the common quotes we hear is, oh, hey, we're Italian, this is what we do. It's one of those things. If there's no impact, there's no abuse, okay? But we also have to keep in mind that a lot of domestic violence and emotional abuse is a part of domestic violence. The typical victim does deny the whole thing. So we use an approach where we go very softly and try to take our time to be able to develop rapport with that victim. Because I consider, if I'm over the age of 60 and somebody comes to my door and says, Lou, I think your daughter is abusing you, I'm probably going to tell you, go away. This is personal information. I don't want to, give this to some stranger off the street. So we have to take that into consideration. So when we're talking to people, we're doing it at a very comfortable, safe pace for them, because we don't want to rush them. Because if we rush them, what are they going to do? They're going to refuse. So that's not our goal. Our goal is to try to take our time with each individual to try to help them and go at their pace so we can help them. And with physical abuse, as Alex said, that's one of the more easier ones to see, because bruises are there, cuts are there, broken bones are there. Those are the types of things that you can see. One of the newer things that we're seeing here locally regarding physical abuse are restraints. And I'm not just talking about actual physical restraints of tying people up, but chemical restraints. People are misusing medications like Ativan, things of that nature, because maybe mom and dad are getting elderly, maybe they have some things that are going on, maybe mental health, whatever, what have you. And this is maybe a problem for the caregiver, and they want them to be quiet so they can do something else. So what do? They give them some type of medication. So that's something that we're seeing. So not only is physical abuse just about hitting, punching, kicking, it can also be misuse of medications and stuff like that.
One time it was very common for the nursing homes to also give medication to quiet people. The good thing is they've done away with that now. They can't get away with that. But if anybody suspected that was happening, the Elder Services does have a program. They have Umbanism, is that the right Ombudsman. They do have that group of people that work with the nursing home, and if anybody has a complaint, they can go to that person and let them know their concerns. And then they work with the agency or the nursing home and try to solve the problem. So a good thing is that that is no longer being used in the nursing homes. As far as the agency reaching out to people, we're very lucky if people call the senior services first, because we have a chance to reassure the fact that there's going to be confidentiality of their name given to the person they're reporting about. And we can soften the blow. So hopefully by the time we've given our report to Elder Services, the person that has called us is well aware of what's going to happen, because we always tell them that we will be reporting what they tell us. We also let them know what the protocol is, that they will probably get a telephone call from Elder Services, and that that doesn't necessarily mean that Elder Services is going to go marching in, and that Elder Services is there to help people, not to put anybody in jail or tow anybody off or any of that stuff. So hopefully by the time Elder Services does call them, we've reassured them that this is a process that is a gentle process, that they've done the right thing, that we're trying to help, and that we work as a team. I also let them know that they will not be getting any information from me once I do report it, other than the fact that, yes, I have reported it. And that's the only information they'll get. So they're not going to be calling me and bugging me and want to find out. And if they do, I just, in a very nicely way, say I'm not allowed to give you that information. But I do wish that they would continue visiting their friends, or whatever the situation is, whether it was that they are a family member, that they don't just haul away in guilt, because they feel guilty that they reported it. So I try to make it really a soft, gentle move towards doing the right thing.
Thank you, Hilda. And you can see that it is a difficult situation for all of our outreach people across the Commonwealth that work at the senior centers to be engaged in such sensitive conversations and trying to balance that trust and openness with the laws that prevail. And so, that's a lot of work, and I think that Cape Cod clearly has the best outreach people working on this and protecting the seniors to the best of their ability. And I think that's fabulous. So, what about abandonment? Is abandonment an issue here? I know it is from the NCEA levels definition, but I didn't see that in Mass General Law.
Sure. So, with the different definitions, there's federal definitions, state definitions, and really what I look at is they're all kind of just defined in different ways. So, abandonment is not in the state's definition of elder abuse, but it could easily be considered caretaker neglect. That, if somebody was taking care of them and now they're abandoned, it still could be reported to protective services. It'll just be defined internally a little bit different. But it is definitely part of it. It's just characterized with a different term.
So, I'm in my 50s. My parents are not alive, but if they were, am I their caretaker automatically by law?
So caretaker, there's not like legally you are their caretaker. It's, are they dependent on you? Are you looking at them to provide, certain daily activities and needs from them? So it's not necessarily a formal relationship, but it has to do with, the living situation. Are you providing things to them that they need? And, even if they're not, if it's an adult child that was living with them that is now deciding to move away and not going to provide for them, they may be self-neglecting now if they can't take care of themselves. So that's, the definition is broad enough that you can catch all sorts of different situations, but it doesn't have to legally be, they're a home health aide or, a PCA or something like that. That's more of like a formal relationship of caregiver to elder. It can be informal as well.
Could a family be questioned about the fact that they didn't at least inform anybody that their parents were alone and that there was no one there helping them?
So, there's certain individuals under our statute that are required to report. Family members typically aren't one of those groups. If they're a social worker or a nurse, they could be caught up in that definition. But in general, no, there's not, at least under our statute, legal consequences for family members not providing. If you are a guardian of them or have some sort of legal relationship, that might trigger something like that.
I just wanted to jump into on the caregiver part. A caregiver, though, has to be over the age of 18, so you can't consider a minor to be a caregiver. Also, they have to mentally and physically be able to be a caregiver as well. So you can't consider a spouse who's severely demented to be a caregiver because they just mentally couldn't perform that function. Or it couldn't be a spouse or a loved one who has severe Parkinson's because they physically couldn't do the role as a caregiver. So there are some qualifications in order to be considered a caregiver as well.
And just following up on that, those type of situations, again, it may be classified just as self-neglect. If it's someone they were depending on that is not really qualified to be a caregiver, that it could still be reported. So, I mean, I would say with all elder abuse situations, if there's a question, call the Protective Services. The worst that could happen is they don't go forward with the investigation. So if it doesn't seem right, if something seems off, call it in. It's confidential, and the worst that happens is that the report doesn't get taken.
And you can always feel free to call one of our supervisors because we're more than willing, if we can't take it, it's not our region, our district, or whatever, we will point you in the right direction of where to go to get that help. So it's best, if you have any questions, call us. Like I said, you don't have to even give the name of an elder or anything. If you want to keep that confidential, just run a scenario past us, and we can tell you how we can help or what agency can help.
Well, that's great. Warning signs. So what are simple things we should look for indicating abuse? I know the physical one is probably the most,
Yeah.
right?
So, physical, you're going to want to look for bruises, you're going to want to look for cuts or scrapes, things, a physical sign that something happened, that there was an abusive situation. And I'll let the others talk about a little bit more about this, given that they have more of the in the field expertise than I do at the administrative level. But there are some things with, emotional abuse. You're going to want to look, for, dramatic changes in personality. If someone's generally a very cheerful person, and then, one day they're, uniquely sad or going through a traumatizing situation, that could be an indicator that something is going on, that it may not be emotional abuse, but it could be a situation that they're going to need assistance with. So, dramatic changes in personality or dramatic changes in, someone's, character, things like that, fear, anxiety, those are big things that, someone that's dealing with an abusive situation, they may be anxious when they previously weren't, or, if they can't take care of themselves, they may have, fear of going home or fear of those types of situations. The same for domestic abuse situation. That's a big part of, of physical abuse is domestic abuse situations that have just aged into the Elder Protective Services realm. So that same type of fear and anxiety that, you think about with domestic violence at, people in their 20s or 30s, the same types of signs could be there for elder abuse. Some of the ones, I'll let Lou talk about sexual abuse because he has got more expertise, but financial exploitation, there are pretty obvious signs to this. One of the big ones is if a third party kind of randomly comes into the elder's life, and we do a lot of trainings for banks and credit unions on this. If the elder's been, going to the same bank for 30 years by themselves and depositing the same amount of money, and then all of a sudden, a cousin that has never been part of the elder's life is here and, they're withdrawing major amounts of cash, that could be a pretty clear indication that something is going wrong. So third parties that are coming out of the blue or dramatic changes in spending habits, if someone is all of a sudden not able to make their rent, they may have been on fixed income for years and have been fine, and now all of a sudden they're facing eviction. That could be a sign that maybe somebody is, exploiting their resources, or have, made themselves a rep payee inappropriately. Things like that can be signs of financial exploitation. I'm trying to think, what are some other signs here? Caretaker neglect, self-neglect. Again, you're going to want to look for some physical manifestation of that. Evidence of a fall. Maybe malnutrition if they, looked like they haven't eaten in a while. Signs that maybe they aren't able to look after their own personal hygiene anymore. Things like that. It's not always going to be the indicator, but they are signs. And again, you can always report those. Did you guys want to talk a little bit more about some other?
Sure. I can say from a regional basis, what are the typical signs and symptoms we see here? So physical abuse, I think, is going to be pretty much normal, across the way. You're talking about slap, kicking, and I want to put it out there too that physical abuse can be done by a demented spouse. Sometimes we have spouses that do have severe dementia, and a part of that disease is agitation. So yes, they can be considered abusers. Now remember, we're not law enforcement, we're social workers. So we're here trying to actually help safeguard that victim. We're not here looking to get somebody in trouble. So that's why we consider it still physical abuse. So one of the biggest things we're starting to see grow into with physical abuse is actually for threat of harm. So when somebody's actually threatening, saying, I'm going to kill you, and the other's actually feeling this is a real, true statement that this individual's got, a bad temper, they have a criminal background history that's pretty long, then if it's a credible threat, it's also considered physical abuse. And that's what we're starting to see a little bit more of here locally. With emotional abuse, again, emotional abuse is, I think that's probably the same thing across the state. It doesn't matter. Where you have somebody that's demeaning, controlling. I like to break our elders up into younger elders and older elders. Some of the older elders still have their old-fashioned ideas, where they consider, maybe the male considers that the wife is kind of his property, that he's the head of his household, that he calls the shots. Well, as we all know, that's not an accurate assessment of society. And so, the wife has just as much right to make her decisions as he does. So controlling behavior is considered emotional abuse. And that's one of the ones we'll see. One of the times that, a big clue that controlling behavior is present is, let's say you're with a friend or family member that's over the age of 60, and you're talking and, everything seems to be fine and normal, and then maybe the spouse walks in. All of a sudden your friend's affect or her face, everything goes very stoic, There's no more emotions. She's not happy-go-lucky. She's not anything. She just kind of looks down. And the spouse starts answering questions, taking control of the conversation. That's usually a huge sign of controlling behavior, which is, a sign of emotional abuse. But also controlling behavior is also typically a sign of all other abuses as well. When somebody's controlling, they're not just doing it usually through emotional abuse, but they're threatening. They're, maybe financially controlling them. There's lots of things. All their abuses are usually interrelated. So if there's one, there's usually more than one of them present. For neglect and self-neglect, I usually lump them together because the signs and symptoms are the same. You're just talking about, is there a caregiver present or not? So typically you're talking about, and we're seeing a lot of this, that evictions. We're seeing a lot of evictions because with the downturn economy and stuff, people can't afford the rent. Now that's considered self-neglect because they don't have proper housing or they're in jeopardy of losing that housing. So that's one of the biggest things that we're starting to see in this area. Evictions, foreclosures, another one, because a lot of predatory loans that happened out in decades past that people can't afford their loans any longer. So that's one of the biggest things we'll see. Medication mismanagement, where a lot of elderly people unfortunately are on a lot of medications. It's not just one or two, they could be on 6, 8, 10. I've seen people on upwards of 20 medications. So it's hard. It would be hard for me to try to figure that out, let alone somebody else. So that's one of the more prevalent things that we see: medication mismanagement, foreclosures, maybe the utilities not being paid. So you're seeing that they can't afford their heat any longer; it's been shut off. Utilities have been shut off, or just flat out refusing medical care. We have some elderly people that have, ambulation is a troublesome thing for them. And so they have histories of falls. And so when they fall, obviously sometimes people get injured, especially when you're elderly and you're a little bit more fragile. But they refuse EMTs. I don't want to go, I don't want to go. Usually, typically, that's out of fear because they think if they go to the hospital, oh, well, that's it, I'm going to a nursing home, I've lost my independence. So that's typically what we see for neglect and self-neglect in this region. Financial exploitation, I think, again, it's one of the things, well, one of the biggest red flags we see typically is an elderly individual say, I haven't seen my bank statement in several months. That's usually quite a big red flag. That means that either A, somebody's changed their mailing address, and let's say that their bank account statements or whatever are going to a son, daughter-in-law, Or maybe they're actually beating them to the mailbox. They're actually going to their post office box, or they're actually just getting out to the mailbox quicker. And the reason for them not seeing that bank statement is because